She slowly stood up and looked towards the two people being suspended in the air by the purple abyss vine. "You guys are fond of skinning people, right?" The two people's faces were filled with bewilderment. The expression of the youth in front of their eyes was too excessive, causing their bones to be filled with terror. As if this youth could dismember their body into thousands of pieces by just looking at them. The short and stout man couldn't help but shout, You better not be too arrogant. Elder Jiang and the others will quickly find out about your presence. You're just an insignificant foundation establishment stage youth. Even if you have some small tricks, when you meet Elder Jiang and the others who are at gold core stage, what use will you be? If you obediently listen and sit with your hands tied, waiting to be captured, then we can ask for leniency for you. Having heard what was said, Hashi lowly laughed. The purple abyss vine swayed around before putting the people, who were suspended in the air, back down. The two people thought she was afraid and became overjoyed at the good news. The short and stout male further raised his voice, You can be considered tactful. Wait for me to meet with Elder Jiang, certainly. Suddenly, his proud words turned into mournful shrieks, and simultaneously shouting alongside him was the tall and thin male. All one could see was the hole that the purple abyss vine slashed on the top of their heads. After their scalps were cut open, their red flesh was exposed. The two people cried in fear as they raised their heads. All they saw was Hashi slowly walking over and sprinkling some medicinal powder on their heads. After a moment, their heart-wrenching and lung-splitting wails filled the entire enchanted boundary the purple abyss vine put down. If an ordinary person heard that sort of pained shrieks, their hairs would certainly stand on end. But Hashi was incomparably calm, even her ice-cold eyes resembling those of Azura from hell didn't change a bit. After 10 minutes passed, 2 pieces of undamaged skin appeared on the cold and moist floor of the prison alongside 2 bloody people who were both hairless and skinless. The 2 bloody people on the floor hadn't stopped breathing yet, their mouths were still incessantly letting out painful moans. Hashi arrogantly looked down on the 2 people and slowly said, Don't you guys enjoy skinning off other people's skins? Now your own skin has been completely peeled off, don't tell me that you shouldn't feel gratified. Those 2 guards had long since already started letting out more air than taking air in. Soon, they would meet a violent death. Hashi waved her hand and beckoned the purple abyss vine, she was just about to end their lives. When suddenly, she heard 1111 suo-suo sounds, and without waiting for her to react, countless insects and ants came out from somewhere within the prison. They looked like black waves, going towards the 2 bloody people. In the blink of an eye, numerous insects and ants crawled all over the 2 bloody people. Some dug into their mouth and nose, others gnawed on their flesh, and some dug into their eyes only to emerge from their nostrils again. Over and over again, their anguished wailing shook the enchanted boundary the purple abyss vine placed down. Even Hashi, who was used to seeing large scenes, became more frightened than she would be seeing the scene down in the 18th level of hell. This scene shook her so much, her expression didn't return. After waiting a few minutes, the anguished wailing came to a stop. Those 2 bloody people had already become a pile of ghastly bones. And those ants and insects resembling waves retreated the same way they came, noiselessly. When they passed by Xiao Li, they halted for a moment. But they didn't seem to have the desire to go gnaw and bite her. Instead, one after another, they spit something out of their mouths. Soon after, the ants and insects completely dispersed. The only thing left behind were the bones of the 2 guards. Hashi recalled Xiao Li's ability to communicate with animals and guessed that these insects and ants came to avenge her. It was just that, these ants and insects were ordinary creatures. They couldn't penetrate a martial artist's spiritual energy barrier, so when Xiao Li was skinned in front of them, they were powerless to do anything. All along, they waited as Hashi completely destroyed these 2 people before they dared to come out and cleanly gnaw and bite through these men. Hashi first poured the bone water on the 2 people's skeletons, ensuring that they would disappear without a trace from this world, before she went back to Xiao Li's side. By now, Xiao Li's circumstances weren't too optimistic. Although her vitality wasn't completely exhausted, her body's enchanted force was almost entirely used up. With this sort of circumstances, even if she was able to survive, she would become an ordinary fox without any spiritual wisdom. She would never again be able to become her Xiao Li. Furthermore, the most troublesome issue was the fur that had been skinned off. The skin of people and fur of animals was a form of protection for oneself. In the case that fur or skin left the body, it would lose all vitality and there wouldn't be any way to join it together with the body. This was completely different from a broken hand or foot. And without her fur, even if Xiao Li recovered her enchanted force, sooner or later, she would die. After all, there was many harmful bacteria that couldn't be seen, floating around in the air. Even if one's enchanted power was outstanding, it wouldn't be able to continuously fight against infection. In a flash, Dandan and the little dragon already appeared by Hush's side. Dandan cried and threw himself at Xiao Li's body, only to be pulled back by Hushi. The small fellow cried so much his eyes were completely red. Choked with emotion, he said, "Mother, what's wrong with Xiao Li Jejie? Will she die?" Although he once thought about eating this nine-tailed fox, after associating with her, Dandan was already fond of this Xiao, too, Jejie. When he thought about her miserable state and the possibility of her dying, Dandan cried until he didn't even know who he was. Contrary to one might think, the little golden dragon wasn't concerned over the little fox's life or death. It was just that, the golden dragon and the nine-tailed fox were spiritual beasts that all of mankind yearned for. Their entire body was precious and longed after by people. If one appeared in front of people when they were still an infant, it was very likely that they would be skinned and their bones would be torn apart. Looking at the state that the little fox was in now, the little golden dragon nevertheless felt a heavy feeling and hurt for her. In addition, Dandan was still crying so broken-heartedly, causing him, the little golden dragon, to feel even more despondent. He didn't want to see Dandan, that fellow, crying. But the little fox's whole body had been stripped of skin and her body's enchanted force was almost entirely drained. He was afraid that even if the previous master of Zijin Palace reincarnated, he wouldn't be able to save the little fox's life. Ari, the human race was truly avaricious and repulsive. Although they already captured the little fox, they still wanted to skin her. They were no better than beast. Dandan was still crying while he embraced Hushi's neck. "Mother, I don't want Xiao Li Jejie to die. You save her, okay?" At this moment, Hushi's gaze rested on the substance that the insects and ants spit out. As she looked, the suspicion in her eyes slowly turned into surprise. Hearing Dandan's words, she immediately replied, "Rest assured, I'll definitely save Xiao Li. Nobody could take away Xiao Li's life. These bastards can't and neither can Yama." After she said this, the speed of Hushi's hands increased. She swiftly took out all kinds of tools from her space. Afterwards, she used spiritual power to wrap up Xiao Li and place her inside a bucket full of spiritual spring water. Upon entering the spiritual spring water, Xiao Li let out pained cries and her entire body ceaselessly trembled. Without any fur protecting her, even if she touched the purest spiritual spring water, it would still cause her to feel so grieved she would wish she was dead. Dandan covered his face as he cried, not daring to look at Xiao Li's pained and anguished appearance. His small face was filled with concerned and frightened tears. The little golden dragon sat next to Dandan. He couldn't help but look towards Hushi with a gaze filled with suspicion. He was completely convinced that this woman didn't have the means to be able to save this little fox. After all, this nine-tailed fox had no fur, its enchanted force was half gone, and it was only at Meridian stage. But, at this moment, Hushi's expression became steady and calm. She quickly took out medicine powders from her space and sprinkled it into the spiritual spring water. These anesthesia medicines were used to numb the nerves. Once they entered the bathing bucket, Xiao Li's cries gradually changed into moans. Only her eyes stayed the same, closed shut from the pain. Her body was still twitching intermittently. Hushi cautiously and solemnly took the fur out of the jade box. Using spiritual spring water, she carefully cleaned it. Then, under the little golden dragon's astonished gaze, she picked up a ball of yellow translucent gelatinous substance from the floor and began slowly smearing it on Xiao Li's fur. Flabbergasted, the little golden dragon questioned, what is that? Hush's movements didn't stop as she quietly replied, this is nectar from the thousand-leaf flower. I saw on ancient records, there was a replenishing bone and growing flesh efficacy. It's just that, according to ancient records, this flower is extinct in Miluo continent. It's said that, as long as you smear this nectar and a large quantity of replenishing spiritual energy medications, you can regrow the limbs of martial artists. Don't even mention rebinding skin and meat. Finished speaking, Hashi no longer paid any mind to the little golden dragon's astonished gaze. She took the fur, that had been cleaned by the spiritual spring water and had thousand-leaf flower nectar smeared on it, out of the spiritual spring water. Soon after, Hush's hands began to move faster. She carefully and quickly covered Xiao Li's body with the fur, allowing every inch of the body to be completely joined together by the fur. Following that, with the flick of her wrist, 10 silver needles appeared at her fingertips. One after another, they entered each of Xiao Li's major acupuncture points. After the time it took to burn a stick of incense passed, Xiao Li's body was densely packed with numerous silver needles. And Hush's complexion turned pale, she had used past the limit for her spiritual energy. The spiritual spring water in the bucket, for some unknown reason, began to lightly boil. As time passed, the fur that had been draped over Xiao Li's body also began to slowly truly combine together with her body. Xiao Li's originally tightly closed eyes began to slowly open, and upon seeing Hush's silhouette, her eyes brightened. Miss. You came back. Hashi nodded her head. Yes, I came back. Xiao Li, refrain from talking for now and obediently turn around your enchanted force, allow your body to recover. Dense pain and guilt rose in Xiao Li's eyes. Her voice trembled as she said, Miss, I couldn't save Wet Nurse Chen and couldn't save B Courtyard's people. You gave B Courtyard to me, but Forgive me, I'm no good, Xiao Li, don't talk anymore. Hushi's hands tightly clenched into fists, hoarsely saying, Shi Jiao and the others didn't die, I already brought them back to life. All you need to do right now is keep on living, stay by my side, and wait for your Gidge to come back. Shi Jiao didn't die. Too good. At this moment, Xiao Li clearly had the appearance of a little fox as her face flashed with a brilliant smile. Miss is truly too awesome. I really admire you, to be able to continue and follow by Mrs. side. I want to always follow by Mrs. side. And Gidge. We will never separate. But. Cuckoo. Xiao Li let out 2 coughs and her voice became more and more muffled. But it seems impossible, my enchanted force is already broken. There's no way I can continue to stay by Mrs. side. I'm sorry, miss. But, to be able to become a person in this lifetime, meet Gidge, and miss Xiao Li. Xiao Li doesn't regret it one bit, doesn't feel sad at all. Miss, thank you. As she was speaking, Xiao Li's voice became weaker and weaker. The little fox's body slowly submerged deeper into the spiritual spring water. The enchanted force on her body scattered at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the wake of her enchanted force disappearing, the fur on her body became darker and darker. Her life's breath also gradually faded away. Xiao Li Jie. Dandan cried, wanting to throw himself over there, but he was firmly held back by the little golden dragon. The little golden dragon's facial expression also showed grief. At this moment, Hashi blankly stood in one place. Her teeth bit down on her lip, and even after her lip split, she didn't notice. Suddenly, a brilliant light shone in her eyes and a purple undercurrent violently surged up. The voice that came out was determined and sounded like crashing ice crystals. Xiao Li, I already previously said that I would protect you from death, so I certainly won't let you dissipate from this world. If I, Nalan Hashi, can't even protect the people by my side, what's the point of my second life? When she finished speaking, Hashi suddenly took out a knife and cut the hollow of her palm. But after she injured her palm, no blood flowed out. Instead, there was a dim red glow around the wound, circling around the surrounding area. A moment later, the dim red glow scattered and a drop of diluted gold slowly seeped out of the wound on her palm, dripping onto Xiao Li's body. Momentarily, The smell of blood filled the air and the rich spiritual qi permeated the room. This was a martial artist's blood essence. The blood had just dripped onto Xiao Li's body when Hush's fingers rapidly joined together, forming an image. After the image was formed, Xiao Li's body emitted dim, red rays of light. The dim, red ray of light appeared to be like her enchanted force, scattering out. But it also seemed to be portraying a totem. Hush's expression became extremely grave. The image formed into a lotus flower, its profound voice yelled two characters, form a contract. Right after the voice fell, the dim, red rays on Xiao Li's body suddenly went into Hush's body. Subsequently, it slowly condensed into a little pattern that resembled the nine-tailed fox on her palm. It was just that, the pattern, very quickly, disappeared without a trace. And Xiao Li, whose enchanted force was previously completely depleted and on the verge of death, slowly received rays of light on her body. Her breaths also gradually picked up again. Upon seeing Xiao Li come back to life, Dandan happily bounced and hopped, scuttling over to Xiao Li's side. Circling around the bathing bucket, he said, "Mother, you're really too awesome. Xiao Li Jiejie is alive, she really managed to stay alive, too great." But, having watched the scene from start to finish, the little golden dragon's eyes were filled with shock and astonishment. She unexpectedly created a life and death contract with the nine-tailed fox. And it wasn't an ordinary master and pet contract, it was one that shared the master's fate and vitality with the spiritual pet. In other words, if the nine-tailed fox was ever on the verge of dying, Hushi would give her vitality to her, allowing her to survive. Naturally, it goes the other way as well. If Hush's vitality was exhausted, the nine-tailed fox would use her enchanted force to replenish her life. This sort of shared life contract didn't have any advantages. Over the last 10 million years, nobody had ever concluded one because there weren't any master or pets that were willing to sacrifice oneself to this degree. Furthermore, this little fox was clearly very weak. For Hushi and her to form a contract, it would only burden her. But Hushi did it. Moreover, she did it without the slightest hesitation. The little golden dragon's mouth opened and closed for a while, but in the end, he didn't say anything. He was incapable of comprehending Hushi's decision to sacrifice herself to this extent for the little fox. He felt an indescribable feeling. This sort of master was the type that truly deserved to have him follow them. After determining that Xiao Li's enchanted force was no longer draining and her life was stable, Hushi threw the medicinal bucket containing Xiao Li back into her space. Dandan was unwilling to go back, wrapping himself around Hushi's thigh. His little face was filled with righteous indignation. "Mother, you're going to go fight bad people, right? The bastards who acted against Xiao Li Jiejie like this are simply too abominable. Dandan wants to come with you to fight against those bad people." Hushi looked at Dandan's gleaming eyes that were filled with burning rage and lightly rubbed his head. "You can rest assured. Mother will definitely make sure that group of brutes pays the proper price for their actions. It's just that, Xiao Li Jiejie is alone in my space. So lonely, and she hasn't even completely recovered from her injury, she needs someone to look after her. Dandan, you obediently stay inside the space and look after Xiao Li Jiejie, okay?" Although Dandan's origin wasn't ordinary, he was extremely weak currently. Just now, he had watched on helplessly as Xiao Li endured hardship. How could she let her own darling suffer hardship? So, Hushi could only use these words to divert Dandan's attention. After all, Dandan was most concerned with Xiao Li's fate at the moment. Sure enough, after Dandan listened to her words, an embarrassed expression showed on his face. Dandan wants to accompany Xiao Li Jiejie and wants to look after Xiao Li Jiejie. But Dandan also wants to be at Mother's side to fight against the bad people together. The little golden dragon who off to the side and had been silent up until now suddenly said, "I'll accompany Laro Da-1 to teach a lesson to that group of bad people. Dandan, you obediently stay in the space and look after the little fox." Dandan was startled, turning his head to look at the little golden dragon. Hushi knit her brow and was just about to refuse. The little golden dragon flew into the air and promptly lifted his head up. "Don't underestimate me. Ever since I ate the divine dragon fruit, my strength has improved by a lot. Although I'm not Larodie's rival, ordinary martial artists at foundation establishment stage or meridian stage are almost the same as garbage to me. I can kill them as I wish. Larodie, you deal with the main culprits while I stay to the side and tidy up those hired thugs and hunting dogs. This is okay, right? The words that the little golden dragon actually caused Hushi to become distracted. This fellow, whether it was inside the secret territory or outside it, liked being called by women and girls. Now, he has so honestly called her Larodie without any mocking or teasing meaning, causing her to be unaccustomed to it. But the little golden dragon wasn't wrong. This other courtyard clearly had experts inside it. If these experts were at Meridian stage, it would still be fine. But if they were at Gold Core stage, it would be difficult for her to manage fighting them when she was alone. If other bodyguards swarmed around her, even if she had an enormous amount of ability, nothing could be done to take revenge. Hushi nodded her head. Okay, you can follow by my side. Just remember, if there's danger, immediately run. Don't pull my leg. 2. The little golden dragon's face twisted, thinking, Benzung is a grand golden dragon who's acting as your supporting person. Yet you still suspect that I'll hold you back. This woman was simply too. Ari, forget it. Who told her to be the Larodie he personally approve? The little golden dragon's face was filled with resentment. But in the end, he didn't say anything, rather, he just silently nodded his head. Hushi rubbed Dandan's head. This time, Dandan didn't continue being willful. Instead, he grabbed Hushi's finger, obediently nodding his head. Mother, I will take good care of Xiao Li Jejie. You must take revenge for Xiao Li Jejie. Oh. Dandan quickly returned back to her space and Hushi left the purple abyss vine's enchanted boundary. Slowly, she walked deeper inside the prison. Before going to look for the main culprits to take revenge, she wanted to see what shady business these people were conducting in the prison. This sort of thick smell of blood and putrid smell wouldn't come from merely killing a few people. Hushi had already previously mentally prepared herself. But when she walked into the deepest part of the basement, the scene in front of her shocked her so much, her breathing stopped for a few moments. Just after turning a corner, Hushi heard the sound of a child crying. At this moment, several men wearing eccentric clothes were in the process of tying 2 young children to a stone table. Soon after, they cut open their stomachs, but she couldn't see what they were moving around in there. Those 2 children were no more than 5 or 6 years old and had their chest opened and stomach split without any anesthesia. That sort of pain was definitely not something they could endure. The sound of heartbreaking crying which made people worriedly pray rung out. So painful, Daddy, I'm very hurt. Save me, but the crying became weaker and weaker. In the span of a few short breaths, it turned into pained whimpers. Soon after, a brief shriek sounded out before it turned silent. Among the oddly dressed group of men, one shook his head and angrily said, unexpectedly, the fog grass failed again. This shalong grass seed is too difficult to grow. Upon contact with nearly every medicinal fertilizer, this seed will get swallowed by the dantian. Even a fragrant incense can't survive. Another person said, these 2 children are considered good, they were able to survive past the time it took to burn a stick of incense. Zee. Their entire stomach got engulfed by the shalong grass. That manna is too wretched. It seems like the younger the child is, the great chance they have of surviving. Next time, we'll test it on a newborn infant, correct? Correct. It's best if the parents are also foundation establishment stage. So the infant can certainly support the shaling grass seed until it buds. The scene in front of Hushi caused her eyes to contract. The boy and girl laying on the stone bed had long since already stopped breathing. Their stomach had been pried wide open and inside their stomach there were 2 grey blades of grass leaves reaching out. It's just that, they apparently seemed to have already withered, softly hanging to the side. The 2 children lying on the stone bed had faces filled with anxiety and alarm. They were so small. They still hadn't understood the dirty and frightening things in this world, nor had they enjoyed the beauty of life before their lives had been taken away in the most painful manner. Step by step, Hashi began walking forward. And at this moment, the group of men, surrounding the corpses of the two children, also discovered Hashi's presence. "Who are you? Don't you know this is a restricted area? Who allowed you to casually come in here?" Hashi's eyes were ice cold and her hands didn't hesitate. In an instant, a purple vine flew out. The sharp tip of the solid vine entered inside these people's bodies, making pu-pu sounds. These oddly dressed males didn't even have time to groan before they got turned into dried corpses by the purple vine. Hashi walked up to the two children's corpses, dazedly staring at them for a moment. Soon after, she extended her hand to softly close their two eyes. Laro da, quickly come. Come look at these." I'm unsure why the author said stone bed when she originally said stone table, but we'll just go with it, I suppose. The little golden dragon, who had originally volunteered to clear out all the miscellaneous people in the underground prison, suddenly let out an alarmed yell. Hashi's figure flashed and appeared next to the little golden dragon's side. She was just about to ask the little golden dragon what was going on when Hashi saw the scene before her. Her mouth was wide open and she was unable to say anything for half a day. This underground prison had a place to interrogate and torture prisoners and the large site that she had just encountered with the operating table. But the prison's deepest area had a tightly closed door. When this door was opened, what appeared was a world as terrifying and cruel as hell. She only saw every room had a collecting spirit spell. Inside each spell, there was a stone bed and each stone bed had a creature laying down on it. Some of these creatures were human and others were magical beasts. But what caused people to become overwhelmed with horror was that these people and magical beasts had various kinds of spirit plants growing all over their body. These spirit plants grew out of their mouth, eyes, nose, and some others were coming out of their skin. These spirit plants were bright and gently swaying around in the spell. Apparently, they received an enormous amount of nourishment in the spell. And the people who had spirit plants crammed in their eyes, ears, mouth and nose. But unfortunately, their stomachs were still moving up and down. They were still breathing, they were alive. So much so that their expressions showed that they wished they were dead. Hashi sucked in a cold breath, slowly saying, "These brutes, are they really worthy to be called human?" Hashi recognized that she was vicious and merciless, cruel and cold to people. But that was only if other people angered her. Otherwise, she wouldn't kill them. She didn't treat other creatures' lives as grass, trampling over and tormenting them. Moreover, the scene in front of her eyes closely resembled the laboratory she rescued her Didi from in her past life. Using people as experimental mice in an experiment. Cutting, maltreating, and torturing as they wished just in order to achieve their base. Just in order to fulfill their own greedy desires. The little golden dragon was also startled by the scene comparable to hell in front of him. He shivered, his mouth and tongue was dry for half a day before he was able to say anything. I thought that these types of bloody, cruel, and dark methods to raise these bound black spirit plants had already become extinct in Miluo continent. I didn't think that these people were so bold, daring to secretly do such inhumane experiments in the basement of this desolate residence. Hashi turned her head. "You know of this experiment?" The little golden dragon nodded his head, with a grave expression. He replied, 1,000 years prior, there were some martial artists who discovered that martial artists with spiritual energy-abundant bodies had the best nourishment for bound black spirit plants. Bound black spirit plants were precious and hard to look for. They were even more difficult to raise, but they were extremely useful in every single aspect. In order to gain more resources and satisfy their greed, this group of people began capturing all kinds of creatures. Without sparing any methods, they began to forcefully raise bound black spirit plants. The method of forcefully raising the spirit plants are extremely cruel. The martial artists who are used as nourishment couldn't live, nor could they die. While they were alive, they had to bear the pain of their body being ripped apart until the nutrients in their bodies were completely taken by the spirit plants. In the beginning, these people used magical beasts to forcefully raise the plants. But they slowly realized that the magical beast's ability to nourish the spirit plants couldn't compare to the abilities of martial artists. Subsequently, they began to abduct martial artists to use as fertilizer. These martial artists got the name medicinal fertilizer. Later, because too many martial artists were worried and this method to forcefully raise the plants was too cruel, 3 kingdoms united to boycott it. The people who used forceful methods to raise the plants through medicinal fertilizers were completely massacred by the angry relatives and friends of the martial artists who were harmed. 1. Couldn't live, nor could they die. The martial artists wouldn't be actually living, they would basically be forever stuck in a half-conscious state. In the past 1,000 years, I haven't heard of anyone using medicinal fertilizers to forcefully raise bound black spirit plants. I even thought that these cruel methods had become extinct. I didn't expect that I would see it here. Hushi wrinkled her eyebrows, and just as she was about to speak, she heard a feeble voice behind her. Begging. Begging you. Kill me. Begging you. Kill me. Hushi suddenly turned her head and saw a young lady that hadn't even reached 20 years old laying on the stone bed in the opposite room. The girl was entirely naked and her dried up and messy hair was scattered on the stone bed. Blue-black mushroom plants grew all over her body, turning her originally bright and clean flesh into soil for these mushrooms. Her body had been suffused with a rotten and stinky smell. And these mushrooms had taken root deeply inside her body. Some were mixed alongside her internal organs and dantian, others were bound to her skeleton. Slowly, were consuming her life force. Hushi extended her hand, wanting to probe this young woman in order to further investigate her circumstances, but the little golden dragon blocked her. Laudar, don't waste your strength. These people are no longer able to be saved. The little golden dragon sighed and with a heavy voice, he said, the seeds of these bound black spirit plants were all directly planted in this people. Afterward, with the help of these martial artists' nourishment, they slowly began to germinate. Once these plants sprout, their life breath and the spirit plants merge together, becoming one. Their heart and soul will all be replaced by the roots of these plants. This is also why they can still breathe even though the spirit plants have blocked up their mouth and nose. So, Laudar, even if you destroyed these spirit plants, these people would be unable to continue living. And if you don't eliminate these spirit plants, their life force will slowly be absorbed by these spirit plants until ultimately, they also die. Having talked up to here, the little golden dragon's face had a sympathetic expression on it. These medicinal fertilizers are already equal to a dead person. How long will it take for them to lose their life force? The only question is merely a matter of time. Furthermore, if they die because the bound black spirit plants absorbed all their life force, their mind will be entirely wiped out, so much so that they wouldn't have a chance to reincarnate. Ari. Laudar, you killing them would be the best ending for them. After hearing the little golden dragon's words, Hushi sunk into silence. And the young lady once again extended her hand towards Hushi, stammering, begging you. Kill us, rather than live this way. It would be better to let me die. Release. The light in Hushi's eyes slowly condensed and became calm. The purple vine in her hands slowly swayed around. She turned to stare at this young lady in the eyes and solemnly nodded. Okay, I'll agree with your request. Just as she finished speaking, the purple vine suddenly sent out a light golden flame. When the vine extended forwards, the light golden flame touched the spirit plants on the young lady. Those bound black spirit plants violently began to shake, seeming as if they were afraid and wanted to run away. But the light golden flame was incomparably strong. In practically the blink of an eye, it seemed to have swallowed the young lady and the blue-black plants inside itself. The light golden flame enveloped the young lady's body. Soon, it seemed that she would die a violent death. But the young lady's face let out a gratified smile. With sparkling eyes, she looked towards Hushi and softly said, "Thank you." Moments later, the young lady on the stone bed had been burnt into bones and the bound black plants disappeared without a trace. But Hushi didn't stop moving. The purple vine flew out of her body. Bringing the light golden flame, it scattered it around the entire basement. Wherever the golden flame went, Nothing escaped being burned. Everything turned into ashes. To the side, the little golden dragon loudly clapped his hands. Laudar is mighty, destroy all these harmful items. In the time it took to burn a stick of incense, the several hundred bound black spirit plants this underground laboratory had been cultivating for several hundred years was completely destroyed by Hashi. She collected all the corpses and using a storage ring, she stored all the skeletons inside. When this whole situation was over, she was going to bury them outside. These people had no way to live a good life, so she hoped they would be able to rest in peace after death. After completely destroying the underground laboratory, Hashi brought the little golden dragon along the former road, heading back. This one time, she didn't intend to conceal her figure. Since Xiao Li had already been saved, her only goal now was to make these brutes pay their debt in blood. Once the patrolling martial artists in the backyard saw Hashi, they all rushed forward to surround her. Moreover, all these martial artists were at high-rank foundation establishment stage and all their clothes was the same. Between advance and retreat, they became each other's corners, closing off all ways of escape. It was clear they were well-trained and cooperative. The 30-year-old tall man leading them pointed at Hashi, strictly yelling, "Where did this rude youngster come from, daring to enter my Jiang family's restricted area?" As he was talking, he was also pointing the gun in his hand at Hashi. His body exploded with fierceness. Hashi slowly raised her eyebrow and repeated one sentence, "Jiang family?" Before coming to other courtyard, she always believed that this whole matter was orchestrated by Dr. Xie. But the two martial artists who were just skinned inside the basement had kept saying that it was Elder Jiang who let them do it. Now this guard also said, this was Jiang family's other courtyard. In other words, Dr. Xie was related to these matters, but he wasn't the mastermind. There was still someone behind him. Moreover, it was this person being called Elder Jiang. When the group of guards saw Hashi's reaction, they immediately burst into loud laughter. One of the people inside the group even said towards the lead martial artist, "Captain, there's no need to ask anymore. It's certain he's a lost little cash cow that, by chance, doesn't have eyes and was delivered to our door. However, since this is the case and he delivered himself to our door, we should accept him." It just happens to be that a few days before, didn't Elder Jiang also said that there wasn't enough medicinal fertilizers to use? Look at this youngster, such soft and tender flesh, abundant spiritual energy. And even though he is only at foundation establishment stage, he escaped our eyes and ears and entered other courtyard. It can be assumed he has some sort of capability. As I see it, he is just right to be a medicinal fertilizer. This group of guards encircling Hashi accessed from head to toe. Apparently, they didn't put her in their eyes at all. Hashi actually let out an eerie smile. Medicinal fertilizer? Are you talking about those martial artists underground that are used to raise bound black spirit plants? What? When the captain of the guards heard what she said, his complexion immediately changed. You went to the basement? How is this possible? Another guard cried out in fear. The basement is guarded by a mysterious iron door that's 100 jin. Even a nascent soul stage martial artist wouldn't be able to force it open without the help of a magic weapon. Hashi lightly fiddled with the purple abyss vine in her hands, unhurriedly saying, "Not only have I been to it, I also completely burned those unsightly black plants. Therefore, even if you guys find countless more medicinal fertilizers, I'm afraid it's useless." When everyone heard what she said, their facial expressions became bewildered. Just at this moment, she heard the alarmed cry of another group of patrolling guards from behind her. The basement. The basement is on fire. The fire spread up to here. In addition, it's spiritual fire. Simply can't extinguish it. In the blink of an eye, the bewilderment in the faces of these several people completely changed into alarm and astonishment. The captain of the guards made a prompt decision, saying to the guard next to him, "You, quickly go notify Elder Jiang. You others people follow me up, get this reckless youth captured for me. Really has eaten a leopard's guts, actually daring to come to my Jiang family's territory and behave so atrociously. Today, Grandpa will let you know how you will die." Exactly. This youngster is merely at foundation establishment stage. Don't tell me he's able to resist all of our attacks. Everyone, follow me up. But without waiting for these guards to move, Hashi faintly laughed. It doesn't matter if you come up together, but none of you can think of running. Right after she said that, purple vines instantly launched out of Hashi's body. The person who suffered the most was precisely the guard who ran out to notify Elder Jiang. The purple vine neatly penetrated the guards' bodies. In the blink of an eye, it sucked in all of the flesh on his body. The group of martial artists witnessing this scene were scared so much their two eyes turned blank. Some of the cowardly ones' butts fell onto the ground. With great difficulty, the captain of the guards held onto the long gun in his hands and forced himself to stop shaking, loudly saying, "You. In the end, who are you? Do you know where our Jiang family is?" Hush's eyes were serene and large, they didn't contain a trace of human emotion in them. Her mouth lifted into a brilliant smile. It added to her beautiful appearance, making her seem prettier, like moonlight. "You're asking who I am?" she slowly asked, even going as far as to carry a somewhat tender intonation, saying, "I am the death god that will bring you guys to hell." Her words had barely sounded out when the purple vine that had already flew out and was suspended in the air acted as if it had received an order. Without stopping, it advanced towards several people. All one heard was "Kaca," and in an instant, these several martial artists' necks had been twisted and the vine had sucked up all their flesh. But there were a few martial artists who escaped the purple vine's first attack and let out mournful calls for help. Hushi's face didn't show the slightest bit of panic, so much so that she was still filled with interest and jumped on top of a fake mountain. While sitting on the fake mountain, she swung her legs back and forth. If there wasn't the shadow of the purple vine flashing about by her side, people from far away would have believed they were looking at a snow-white and jade-skinned, delicate and elegant, innocent and pure little youth. In the blink of an eye, this entire team of martial artists had been completely massacred by the purple abyss vine. The purple abyss vine noiselessly returned to Hush's hand, its purple leaves intimately rubbed against the white, jade-like wrist. And at this time, the other martial artists inside other courtyard heard this group of martial artists' miserable shouting. Soon, there was many martial artists quickly making their way over here. There were clearly quite a few people here that had a high level of strength. A large part of them were at the summit of Foundation establishment stage, but there were also quite a few martial artists who were at Meridian stage. When this group of people arrived at the scene of the murder, they were startled by all the skeletons in front of their eyes. What exactly is going on? They heard the screams and rushed here, but what they saw wasn't a fighting scene, instead it was a floor filled with bones of the dead. Suddenly, someone pointed at one of the skeletons among the corpses, crying out in fear, louder, "This is Sun Gang's butterfly sword." Sun Gang, it was precisely the captain of the guards from before. And at this moment, as this group of people looked on, they also discovered that the clothes these corpses were wearing were those of guards from other courtyard. The middle-aged man that brought the group over suddenly reacted, his pair of eagle-like eyes looked straight at Hushi, who was sitting on top of the fake mountain. "Who is your distinguished self? Coming to my Jiang manor to cause trouble? Don't tell me you're impatient of living." Hushi's hand supported herself on the fake mountain. Her head was tilted to the side, showing her elegant complexion and graceful, snow-white neck. She slowly said, "I'm not impatient of living, but when looking at this group of unreputable people, I feel impatient. Therefore, the only option I'm left with is to send you guys off to hell, so as to avoid hindering my sight." Presumptuous. Having heard what was said, the middle-aged man was seething with anger. Pointing at Hushi, he shouted, "What do you count as, actually daring to come to my Jiang manor and say such nonsense? And you even dare to slaughter my Jiang manor's guards? You really think my Jiang family doesn't have anyone? Come, follow me up. I want to see this Foundation establishment stage waiter who acts so savage with a dog's courage in my Jiang manor." His words were furious, but the middle-aged man's hand didn't stop either. He quickly took out a cold, deep green long sword. The middle-aged man poured his spiritual energy into it, causing the sword to whiz as he swiftly flew towards Hushi, who was sitting on the fake mountain. At the same time, Those Meridian stage martial artists who followed behind the middle-aged man also took out their magical flying swords and waited for action. Soon, the green long sword already began striking in front of Hushi. The purple vines wrapped around her slender arms suddenly swept out, one after another. All that was heard was "pa," and in the blink of an eye, flames erupted all around everyone. That green long sword was stopped mid-air by the purple vine, and without waiting for the middle-aged man to respond, it suddenly turned around and facing the group of people, it flew towards them. Ah! One of the people in the group of guards let out a woeful howl as the green long sword pierced through his chest. He slowly bowed his head to look at the long sword in his stomach. His eyes were filled with disbelief and astonishment. Soon after, his head became askew as he stopped breathing. Hushi held onto the purple abyss vine as she stood on top of the fake mountain. Her silky, satin-like hair danced around in the wind alongside the purple abyss vine, who was swaying about in her hands. The youth's beautiful face showed a serene smile, seeming to be someone who came out of a painting. But at this moment, she looked as if she was Yama who would seize lives, causing people to feel terror. The middle-aged man's look became even more unsightly. The flying sword that was inside the person's stomach hummed several more times before returning back to his hands. He originally thought that this was merely a foundation establishment stage martial artist. Even if the magic weapon in their hands was more powerful and they could skillfully and easily wipe out a group of foundation establishment stage guards. But when they ran into his own group of Meridian stage martial artists, they wouldn't be able to do devastation as they wished. But it was very clear, the fact was that his imaginations and reality were extremely far apart. In the end, who are you? Fear rose in the middle-aged man's heart and he couldn't help but raise his voice and ask. But before he could finish speaking, Hushi suddenly flew into the air and the purple vine in her hands whistled as it came out. All that was heard was a loud peng as the purple vine rolled up 10 or so foundation establishment stage martial artists. Soon after, they were ruthlessly flung into a wall. It was a pity, these foundation establishment stage martial artists weren't at a high rank, so when the purple abyss vine rolled them up, their spiritual energy defense was also eliminated. Without their spiritual energy defense, they became ordinary people. To be flung so ruthlessly against the wall, they didn't even groan before all their bones were shattered as they cleanly died. At this moment, the middle-aged man's facial expression was very alarmed. He was just about to call for everyone to go up together. When suddenly, there was the sound of someone clapping behind him. Soon after, an old man wearing a smiling expression slowly said, "Good skill, good magic weapon." Sure enough, the hero is a young man. It's hard to believe that genius doctor is so young. Not only do you have exceptional medical skills, unexpectedly, your cultivation stage is also so excellent. Really makes our group of old men not want to admit to our old age. His words had just been said when Hushi saw the group of guards who were originally surrounding her, including the middle-aged man, all let out revering expressions. One by one, these several people all stepped aside, creating a road. At the end of the road, several tall, male silhouettes walked over. All she saw was a male wearing a grey cloth gown with a long beard. His eyes were fixed on Hushi, they were filled with jealousy and bitter resentment. But it wasn't Dr. Xie, who was it? There was a 50 or 60-year-old man walking in front of Dr. Xie. His hair and beard was already grizzled and his face had even more pronounced wrinkles. This old man was clearly many years older than Dr. Xie, but the brightness in his eyes was hidden, and from head to toe, the movement of his spiritual energy didn't even leak out a tiny bit. This was clearly an expert. And seeing Dr. Xie's respectfulness when standing behind him, it explained that this person was other courtyard's master and was also most likely the Elder Jiang these people kept mentioning. And behind Elder Jiang and Dr. Xie, there were also 2 robust males following behind them. Their entire body was filled with muscles and looking at their cultivation, they had clearly already reached the summit of Meridian stage, far surpassing the guards in this courtyard by quite a bit. Hushi only used her own special ability to examine and could clearly see that this Elder Jiang's cultivation was already at the middle of Gold Core stage. With Hushi's current cultivation stage, Any martial artists under Gold Core Stage didn't have any importance to her. But if she opposed someone at Gold Core Stage, especially someone at the middle of Gold Core Stage, the outcome was unknown. Dr. Xie looked towards Hashi, the cold light in his eyes turned around before he chuckled. Elder Jiang, this is the person this subordinate spoke to you about on that day, Genius Dr. Shi. Saying this, he looked towards Hashi and insincerely smiled. Genius Dr. Shi, you're wrong. We left a slip of paper at your house with good intentions and thoughts, inviting you over to be an honorable guest. Even if you weren't grateful, how can you sneakily infiltrate our other courtyard and even harm the guards here? Dr. Xie didn't get to finish speaking when Elder Jiang stopped him, insincerely saying, how do you speak Chongming? Genius Dr. Xie is the honorable guest we expected. No matter how she came, we still welcome her. Saying this, he beamed at Hashi. His expression and tone as he spoke was full of benevolence without the slightest hint of malice. We're honored by your presence, Genius Dr. Xie. Your presence really brings light to my humble other courtyard. The people under my hand didn't recognize Genius Dr. Xie and upset your distinguished self. Please don't take offense. Hashi's face also held a mild smile. Her exquisite 5 organs were faintly shone on by the candle light in the dark night. Occasionally she looked innocent and from time to time she looked demonic. The guards here didn't recognize me, so they acted out. Then the people in my B courtyard, they clearly knew, but they still acted out. Elder Jiang was startled, looking at the youth in front of him. He became absent-minded for a moment. He had heard Dr. Xie say before, the genius doctor, was able to repair fractured bones and mend arteries and veins, was a young man. He now saw with his own eyes and shockingly found that this youth's age was so young, had such a fragile figure, and elegant appearance. He clearly had the pretty complexion of a young lady, but his 2 eyes were piercing and frigid, as if one would shiver from just looking because of fright and coldness. Naturally, this feeling only lasted for a split second. After all, Elder Jiang was already a Gold Core expert. He quickly returned back to reality and quietly raised his spiritual energy to oppose this youth's imposing oppression. The expression on his face was still the benevolent old man expression as he smiled. It was merely a giant misunderstanding, that's all. Genius Dr. Shi, there's no need to fuss over such minor matters. Laro Fu merely heard of Genius Dr. Shi's exceptional medical skills, so Laro Fu wanted to invite Genius Dr. Shi over to compare medical notes with you, a mutual exchange of assistance. Hashi said, oh, her intonation was an unable to be said carelessness. Compare medical notes? Just in order to call me over to compare medical notes, you find people to kill, burn, and abduct people? Elder Jiang, this way of comparing medical notes is really new, really unusual. Why don't I come to give you some advice? Elder Jiang's eyebrows raised as he chuckled. Oh? There's also this type of matter. Having said this, he seemingly turned around to blame Dr. Xie, who was standing behind him. Chongming, what did you do? Didn't I tell you to go invite Genius Dr. Xie? How can you touch as you wish? Dr. Xie's eyes changed. How could he not understand his master's meaning? At once, he looked at Hashi with a face filled with remorse. Genius Dr. Shi, somewhat misunderstood. Originally, we respectfully came to request for you. Who would have thought that the subordinates at your manor were unable to differentiate good from bad? Without distinguishing between right and wrong, they regarded us as bad people. My subordinates were helpless and could only resist. Who would have imagined that when we resisted, they didn't grasp appropriate behavior? Bringing Xiao Li Gunyang was also in order to get Genius Dr. Shi to come. We really wish for you to properly apologize. As for those youngsters that didn't know propriety and offended Genius Dr. Shi, I already firmly taught them a lesson. Wishing Genius Dr. Shi is big and generous, don't bother about them. These words that Dr. Xie spoke were both gentle and forceful, with a degree of propriety. When Elder Jiang heard them, he was immensely pleased. He couldn't help but stroke his beard and smile. If Genius Dr. Shi is still dissatisfied, it wouldn't be a bother for me to completely kill those several subordinates in order to help you vent your anger. But if I was to say it, your B courtyard, the people that died were merely just several slaves, nothing more. Dragging them over to sell at the market wouldn't earn you more than a few coins. Genius Dr. Xie, if you feel that you have suffered a loss, I will pay you back 10 times the amount. Correct, nothing more than a few insignificant subordinates. They're only worth a few coins. Hashi slightly evoked the corners of her mouth, her voice was gloomy and slow. What Elder Jiang said is correct. Having heard what was said, a thread of happiness flashed through Elder Jiang's mind and at once, he said, since Genius Doctor she is so fair and reasonable, it would be better to follow me. But, he didn't get to finish speaking when he suddenly saw a purple vine fly out from Hashi's wrist. Like lightning, the purple vine divided into 10 in the air and facing all directions it went out. In the blink of an eye, it penetrated 10 guards' chests. Before they could even come back to reality, it ended their lives. 10 purple vines floated around in the air, resembling a purple barrier. It also emitted a pungent bloody smell. Dr. Xie's face became extremely ugly and he sternly pointed at Hashi. Shi Yu, don't be shameless. We had good intentions and treated you with respect, yet you have the impertinence to raise your hand when Elder Jiang was speaking. Are you impatient of living? The smiling expression on Hashi's face slightly changed. Her finger lightly caressed the purple abyss vine as she sneered at him. What? Didn't you say, it's merely a few insignificant subordinates, nothing more. Not worth any coins. Why are you angry now? Minor matters, be what? You literally slaughtered everyone in her courtyard. If you guys wish, I can go to the marketplace to buy a dozen more and compensate you guys. These words, didn't Elder Jiang just moments ago say them with his own mouth? At this moment, Elder Jiang's benevolent expression finally had a small crack. His expression when looking at Hashi became colder and gloomier. Dr. Xie knew that Elder Jiang had moved to the point of wanting to kill. His heart was carefree as he coldly looked towards Hashi, mockingly saying, having been called Genius Dr. Shi, you really think you're a genius doctor? I'm telling you, it's best if you don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Today, if you obediently surrender and pay allegiance to my Jiang manner, we'll forget about this. If you dare to resist, your subordinate's end will be your end. At this moment, Elder Jiang's voice also turned frosty. Merely a few insignificant subordinates, if they died, then they died. It counts as an offer of apology for my subordinates offended Genius Dr. Shi. But Genius Dr. Shi, clearly understand your situation. Offending my Jiang family wouldn't serve any benefit for you. Having heard what was said, Hashi lowly began to laugh, which slowly changed to arrogant laughter. Oh, I seem to have forgotten to tell you. Just a moment ago, I already visited your Jiang family's laboratory, and found your hostages inside. Seeing as you guys were so enthusiastic and hospitable to my Xiao Li, I also gave Elder Jiang a very small gift. By this time, Elder Jiang and Dr. Xie's faces greatly changed. Dr. Xie involuntarily yelled out, You visited the underground room? What did you do in there? Hashi lifted her eyes up. Under her long eyelashes was a pair of glorious and starry eyes, however they contained a cold light. Didn't do anything, It's nothing more than a fire, that completely burning all the things inside. Including those alive but inferior to death medicinal fertilizers, and also all the bound black spirit plants. Unexpectedly you burned all our spirit plants. Dr. Xie loudly roared. Because he was extremely angry and distressed, his face warped. Do you know how much heart's blood we spent, how many generations we had accumulated in order to be able to raise those bound black spirit plants? Elder Jiang was also angered until his face turned blue. The gaze he looked at Hashi with no longer contained any fake good-naturedness, all that was left was cold-heartedness. Shi Yu, do you really think that this Laro Fu wants your replenishing arteries and veins extinct skill and will just ask for it from your mouth? As long as you're captured and we use a searching soul method on you, you will no longer be able to keep your secret. An unable to tell good from bad, yellow-mouthed child, too, Laro Fu wants you to regret your conduct today. Elder Jiang didn't get to finish speaking when he saw a purple shadow flying towards him. Indeed, this was Hashi directly mounting a sneak attack. Elder Jiang coldly snorted and disdainfully said, Nothing more than an insignificant foundation establishment stage martial artist, yet wants to sneak attack Larofu. Simply overestimating one's capabilities. Finished speaking, he didn't even take out a magic weapon. His large, elegant gown suddenly waved. All one heard was "Pa," and he had ruthlessly threw out the purple vine that was heading towards him. The strength Elder Jiang used to throw was enormous. The purple vine was thrown very far away, and one after another, they all hit a wall. Even the wall had a small spider web-like crack in it. Elder Jiang felt very proud of himself in his heart, but he suddenly heard Dr. Xie's alarmed shout, "Elder Jiang, save me." His face greatly changed. Turning his head, he witnessed Dr. Xie, who already had 3 or 4 purple vines twisting around him, hoisting him high up in the air and flying in Hush's direction. This youngster, the purple vines just then were simply part of the plan to create a diversion. One, involuntarily yelled out. He lost control of how loud his voice was. 2, yellow-mouthed child. Something used to call satirical, ignorant children birthday update. 3/4, nearly there. Fun fact about myself. In my home, I actually speak Cantonese, not Mandarin. The actual person she wanted to attack was Xie Chongming. He saw that Dr. Xie was right in front of Hushi, and Hushi had already picked up a long sword infused with cold light. Elder Jiang's complexion became extremely unsightly. With a loud roar, he threw himself over. "You dare!" But before he fell down, he heard shua 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 shui sounds. Immediately following that, Dr. Xie let out a mournful howl. His entire body resembled a drum. Dropping on the floor with a thump, he incessantly rolled around. Yes, exactly like a drum. Because the current Dr. Xie had already had his 4 limbs chopped off by the identical vines, all that was left over was a head attached to an upper body. His arms and legs were laid to the side, on the floor. His fingers had already begun to turn blue, but they were still moving around neurotically. Hashi slowly walked up to Dr. Xie, who was ceaselessly shouting. She smiled innocently and softly. "Dr. Xie, when you let people kill wet Nurse Chen and take out her internal organs, were you happy?" "Oh, I think you were definitely happy." She let out a light sigh. "Therefore, I don't mind letting you feel even happier." The words had just come out when the long sword in her hand flew out like a phantom, heading towards Dr. Xie's face to say hello. Dr. Xie's eyes resembled death. They were full of alarm and despair. Shortly, he no longer had eyes. His face didn't have a nose, ears, eyebrows, and eyes anymore. He still had a mouth, but his mouth no longer had a tongue. He couldn't make any noises. But it didn't matter. He still had his ears. He could still hear sounds. He also had his consciousness. The current pain on his body tortured him to the point of hovering between life and death. Hashi regained the long sword, but she didn't bother to wipe the bloodstain on it. Rather, she directly threw the long sword away. At last, she finally looked upon Dr. Xie. Her voice was soft and she had a tender expression as she said, "Although you killed wet Nurse Chen and tortured Xiao Li, I've still decided that you can't die too easily. Now, you are unable to see, talk, walk, or do anything. But with a martial artist's valiant body, you won't die so easily either. You can't even kill yourself. You will suffer this hellish torture every day and every night for a long time, incapable of freeing yourself or escape. I trust that you'll feel extremely happy about this feeling." On the floor, Dr. Xie, who couldn't even be said to have a body anymore, frantically trembled. He twisted and turned, but nobody spared him a glance anymore and nobody cared about his life or death anymore. To Hashi, he was already a dead man. Wet Nurse Chen's hatred has already been revenged. To Elder Jiang, Xie Chongming, having lost both his hands and feet and being unable to look or see, had already lost all his value. He was no longer worthy of paying any attention to. It was just that everyone turned speechless for half a day after seeing Hushi's ruthless methods. Clearly they're nothing more than 16 or 17 years old, didn't expect that when he cut off someone's 4 limbs and removed their eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, his expression still wouldn't have the slightest change. No, his face still carried a breathtaking smile. This youth really is too terrifying. Even Elder Jiang had these thoughts. He originally wanted to attract him to his side, but he retrieved these thoughts. A thread of fear rose in his heart. If this youngster was allowed to mature, perhaps even he wouldn't be his match. So, after he obtained the extinct skill of replenishing arteries and veins, he must completely destroy this youth. Thinking up to here, Elder Jiang took a deep breath. His cold gaze looked towards Hushi as he slowly said, "Looks like you won't choose to surrender and pay allegiance to my Jiang family." Hushi held onto the purple abyss vine again and lightly laughed. "Old fart, I dare to surrender and pay allegiance, do you dare to receive it? Just based on some lower-C Jiang family, you want me to surrender and pay allegiance? Don't dream too big. In this world, the people who can make me obedient and surrender haven't been born yet." The fury in Elder Jiang's eyes flashed as he coldly said, "Good, very good. Nothing more than an insignificant foundation establishment stage, and one's way of speaking really isn't small. Originally I still wanted to give you face, but seeing as you're unable to tell good from bad, I won't stand on ceremony." 1. When he finished speaking, a cyan flag suddenly appeared in his hand. This flag's appearance resembled the black flag Feng Yunjing carried inside the white fog, but it to be a lot less imposing when compared to that black flag. When the cyan flag appeared in Elder Jiang's hand, it was only the size of his palm, but when spiritual energy was poured in, it suddenly grew in size. Elder Jiang lowly roared, "Thousand Wind Blade." The cyan flag flew up and suddenly swirled up into a tornado, completely encircling Hushi. Once she was trapped inside the tornado, Hushi felt an immense pressure. This tornado was actually formed with countless wind blades, and every wind blade had the spiritual pressure and attack force of a gold core stage martial artist. Inside the hurricane, Hushi had no way to move, she could only passively defend. Under these straitened circumstances, her body quickly developed numerous bruises of all shapes and sizes. And, this was under the purple abyss vine protecting her at full force. If not, she wouldn't have merely received bruises. Seeing Hushi's sorry figure inside the tornado, Elder Jiang couldn't help but sneer at her. "How are things? Do you know the distance between Foundation Establishment stage and Gold Core stage now? Did you really think you could strut around just because you had a little bit of skill? Today you will learn that there are mountains beyond mountains, people beyond people, too." While saying this, Elder Jiang's hands raised and a large concentration of spiritual energy poured into the cyan flag. Quickly, the wind blades surrounding Hushi picked up their speed by a few degrees. Although Hushi didn't receive any serious injuries, the purple abyss vine was cut everywhere because it was protecting her. Occasionally, purple plant juice would drip down. Hushi's heart gradually became anxious, and in her consciousness, she chid at the purple abyss vine. She wanted it to first protect itself, not to use its own spiritual energy to protect herself. But for the first time, the purple abyss vine was determined to resist against her command. No matter how badly it got cut up by the wind blades, it continued to protect Hushi. Even if its vines were breaking off, root by root. It didn't consent to allowing her receive any mortal injuries. Elder Jiang laughed out loud, "Don't struggle, this pure wind flag, when paired with the 1000 wind blade, is actually my unique skill. As long as you're trapped inside, even high-level gold core stage martial artists wouldn't be able to even think about coming out. You're merely an insignificant foundation establishment stage youngster. Do you really think you can rely on some magical plant, with unknown origins, and be able to get out of the 1000 wind blade? Don't dream anymore. I advise you to hand over the replenishing arteries and veins extinct method now, this way I may still give you a way out. If you continue refusing to listen to reason, I can also beat you into a useless person and take out the things I want from your brain. By then, you better not regret. 1. Stand on ceremony, he won't be nice anymore. 2. Mountains beyond mountains, people beyond people, there's always someone more talented." The information obtained from the soul-searching technique was guaranteed to be true, but there was a 90% chance it would be damaged. But unless it was absolutely essential, Elder Jiang didn't want to use this method. Elder Jiang was howling with laughter, his heart was content. But he suddenly heard a loud sound, peng. The hurricane originally spinning around Hushi suddenly, violently began to shake. Soon after, a crack even appeared. A childlike voice carrying some mischievousness started laughing. "Smelly old man, this tornado can't be broken from the inside, but it can be from the outside, easily." The voice just came out when Hushi came out of the crack, with a body full of wounds, carrying a purple abyss vine riddled with scars. Following Hushi leaving, the 1,000 wind blades that made up the tornado quickly disappeared into thin air. And a blood-covered small dragon hung by Hushi's side. Facing Hushi, it mischievously laughed. "Laro da, I already tidied up that other group." Hi. I didn't pull your back leg." The light in Hushi's eyes dimmed a bit as she crouched down to carry the little golden dragon. It didn't know when her hand had so much medicinal powder, but she lightly spread it on the fierce wounds on its flesh, softly saying, "Didn't I tell you to run when there was danger?" The medicinal powder was spread across its body, causing the little golden dragon's aching body to tremble. But in spite of this, it still willfully laughed. "Laro da, you're so brave and fierce. I am your Xiao Di, how can? Cuckoo. How can I run away? Isn't that losing your, Laro da's, face? He, no matter what, it's Ben Zun. Because I was undaunted by the danger, I was able to damage that trash tornado. Laro da, you owe me a favor, got it." Hushi used gauze to wrap up its wounds before softly saying, "Obediently enter my space, and when Laro da teaches a lesson to these bad people, I'll make delicious food for you." The little golden dragon's eyes brightened. Rubbing against Hushi's wrist, he didn't hesitate to go back inside her space. Elder Jiang's complexion became grave and avaricious. The way he looked at Hushi seemed as if he was looking at a monster. "Didn't expect that you not only had a 9-tailed spirit fox, but you also had a golden dragon. If I can obtain the golden dragon, 9-tailed spirit fox, and the replenishing arteries and veins extinct method, don't even talk about joining the Doctor Association. Even if it was returning to my family, it would be an easy feat. How could an ordinary person think that an insignificant foundation establishment stage martial artist would have so many treasures on their body? Ha, my being able to capture you today is extremely lucky." When he finished speaking, the cool breeze flag was once again taken out. Rising into the air, it also simultaneously picked up dust. At the same time, Elder Jiang also flew up in the air. Arrogantly looking at Hushi, he disdainfully said, "You thought that just because you escaped the 1,000 wind blade once, you would be able to escape from my hands. If I can activate the 1,000 wind blade the first time, I can activate it a second time. Moreover, this time's 1,000 wind blade will be even stronger than last time's." After a moment, hula was heard and the cool breeze flag began to violently shake, swirling up an immense sandstorm. This time, it won't only be dust and tree leaves. Even the tiles and bricks on the house will be picked up into the hurricane. So much so that even the hill shook and swayed. Hushi's complexion was grave and a blue and red long sword appeared in her hand. She got this sword from Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory. It was the sword that fit her the most now, Li Shui sword. It had both the water attribute and fire attribute. But before Hushi could move the sword, the purple abyss vine in her hand seemed to have not listened to her command and abruptly rose up into the air. 1. Xiao Di, younger brother. Little Purple. Hushi let out a cry of surprise. With all her might she prayed to the gods, wanting to bring Little Purple back. But the purple vine seemed determined, completely ignoring Hushi's order. It knocked against the cyan flag, releasing the hurricane. The only sound was peng 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 repeatedly, loudly, sounding out. Under Hushi's alarmed gaze, she saw the thick purple vine fly high up then come crashing back down. Following that, thick purple juice flowed down the side of Hushi's leg. Soon after, a cyan flag had been rolled up, swaying and wobbling. It was brought in front of Hushi. Hushi could perceive that the purple abyss vine wanted to help improve her mood. Its scattered leaves softly swayed around, seeming to be both, taking credit for its achievement and asking for forgiveness. Clearly it had been cut everywhere by the cool breeze flag's hurricane, so miserable. But Hushi could sense the purple abyss vine's consciousness, very happy, very cheerful. Can help master, really is too great. Can punish the scoundrel that caused Dan Dan to cry, really is too great. Hushi let out a soft breath and no longer attempted to reissue the flame. Instead she took the cool breeze flag from the purple abyss vine and extended her hand to softly touch it. "Little Purple, thank you," Hushi slowly said, "but, in the future, you're not allowed to disobey my command and act on your own initiative. Otherwise, I'll remove our master and pet contract. Do you hear me?" The purple vine shook and its leaves started drooping down. Feeling wronged and trying to curry favor, it rubbed against Hushi's wrist. Hushi's pressed down on her forehead. This group of fellows really didn't let people be worry-free. These fellows really let people love dearly and take pity on them. Her voice deepened. "Youngster, you can rest assured. I'll definitely make the old fools who hurt Xiao Li and you guys pay the price. You guys have to have some faith in this Laro Da, do you understand?" Finished speaking, her fair wrist moved and the purple abyss vine quickly returned to her space. And her deeply cold gaze looked towards the distant Elder Jiang's ugly complexion. At this moment, Elder Jiang's complexion was extremely unsightly. He didn't expect his own cool breeze flag to be stolen by that purple devil plant. Although the cool breeze flag wasn't the most difficult to deal with magic weapon on him, this type of shame from being hit by the younger generation caused his killing intent towards Hushi to deepen. Thinking up to here, Elder Jiang quickly took out a long sword, sneering, "You think that just because Laro Fu doesn't have the cool breeze flag anymore I won't be able to resist you anymore? Simply is indulging in wishful thinking. Qianzi sword, attack for me." Originally, it seemed to be the large and formidable Thousand Wind Blade, deconstructing and recombining, one by one. In her mind, it was no longer a secret. When she finished speaking, Hushi's mind moved and the cool breeze flag in her hand flew out. As Elder Jiang's reaction was still catching up, the cool breeze flag became an engulfing sky storm, advancing towards Elder Jiang. "What? Thousand Wind Blade? This can't be." Elder Jiang let out a cry of surprise, practically dumbstruck. "This is actually my Jiang family's own skill. How can you use it? Moreover, that cool breeze flag had already been used by me. How can you use it?" Elder Jiang let out furious shouts as the twisting hurricane in front of him grew larger and larger, eventually enveloping him inside it. Inside the hurricane, sounds of Elder Jiang's angry questions, depressed groans, as well as the sound of the wind blades cutting his clothing and flesh. But this scene continued to happen until a violent boom was suddenly heard in the center of the storm. Immediately, the entire hurricane exploded open. Leaves, sand, and dust settled on the ground as the hurricane gradually faded away. Lacking strength, the cool breeze flag also fell down into Hushi's hands. Elder Jiang's eyes were blood red as he rigidly watched Hushi, who was nearby. His eyes were filled with hatred and unspeakable fear. At this moment, his complexion was pale and there were bloodstains on his mouth. His clothes were all torn and his body was filled with cuts from the wind blades. How could he still possess the relaxation he had previously? It was extremely clear that in order to eliminate the Thousand Wind Blade, he paid a price. Naturally, Hushi didn't expect a small tornado would be able to get rid of this old fart. But she faintly laughed. "Old fool, the feeling of being injured by your own magic weapons isn't bad, right?" Elder Jiang became so angered, his body shook. He suddenly took out some medicine pills and stuffed it in his mouth, fiercely looking at Hushi. "Did you think that the Thousand Wind Blade flag was my most lethal magic weapon? You've merely learned a bit of superficial knowledge, yet you dare to strut around in front of me. Right now, I'm going to use my unique skill to dismember your body, you shameless youngster. If you have the ability, use my tricks again to come see me." He just finished speaking when the pressure from spiritual power in his body began pressing down harder. And inside his hand, a twinkling thunder light, golden long sword appeared. When he waved his hand, the sound of thunder suddenly echoed from the long sword. Thunder and wind rushing movement. "Smelly youngster, drop dead for me." Momentarily, the entire desolate residence shook and countless pieces of clay and sand picked up in the hurricane and headed towards Hushi. At the same time, a clap of thunder and lightning which caused people's blood to run cold, sounded out. Elder Jiang had the wind and thunder dual spiritual roots. Although it couldn't be compared to heavenly spiritual roots, in Miluo continent, it could be considered a rarely seen good attribute. For him to get to today's achievement, he had used countless precious spiritual pills, and adding on 100 years of bitter cultivation, he had achieved gold core stage with great difficulty. If he lost to this yellow-mouthed child in front of him, what did his 100 years of payment count as? Hashi had been enveloped inside the hurricane. Her spiritual protective cover was constantly being blown by the wind, causing it to become unstable and crack before maintaining itself again. Hashi's expression was extremely calm, her two eyes distributed warm rays of golden lights, and in the blink of an eye, she moved towards Elder Jiang. When the wind and thunder rushing movement had been completely finished, Hashi's mouth curved up into a dazzling smile. A moment later, when she flipped her palm up, a wind and thunder-infused long sword appeared in her hand. Following that, in front of Elder Jiang's astonished gaze, Hashi resolutely waved the long sword. For a moment, hurricane and hurricane bumped, thunder and lightning tangled together and rumbled. The entire courtyard seemed as if it could no longer withstand the battle, and the wall angrily collapsed. And a moment later, the hurricane which was originally attacking Hashi seemed to have been swallowed. Slowly it became weaker and melted away. At the same time, the earth-shaking thunder and lightning hurricane turned around and headed to attack Elder Jiang. Not possible. This isn't possible. This is absolutely not possible. Elder Jiang's eyes were filled with fright and despair. The thunder and wind rushing movement was their Jiang family's unique skill. Even his own family's younger generation could only learn this secret method through word of mouth. Why? Why could this youth learn it today? In the end, who was she? In the end, who was she? A moment later, he heard Hush's clear and ridiculing voice sound out from a nearby place. Didn't you say that I could learn your unique skill? Thunder and wind rushing movement, in the end, it's just this and nothing more. Elder Jiang let out unresigned shouts. Following this, he was completely engulfed by the hurricane produced by wind and thunder rushing movement. Soon after, there were his bellows and the sound of his body being torn apart by the hurricane. This was his unique skill. Now it had been completely exerted on his body. This wasn't only the torture on the body, it also ruined one's spirit. After the hurricane, Elder Jiang's body was similar to a piece of cloth. With a bump, he fell down on the floor and spit out a big mouthful of blood. There wasn't an intact piece of flesh on his body anymore. With a speed visible to the naked eye, his appearance and skin quickly aged. Hashi held onto a long sword in her hand. Advancing forward, she arrogantly looked at him. Out of fear, Elder Jiang instinctively wiggled his body, wanting to recoil. He repeatedly mumbled, "Forgive me. Forgive me. I am Jiang family's person, I can give you countless benefits. If you kill me, Elder Jiang certainly won't let you off. I already reported the matter of your replenishing arteries and veins method to my family. As long as you don't kill me, I'll conceal you from my family." Hush's mouth curved up into a shallow smile. Her pretty facial features were outstanding, but she also had the characteristics of a youth's immaturity. But a moment later, the long sword in her hand whooshed out. It resolutely broke Elder Jiang's dantian. "Naturally, I'll let you live. I'll let you live in pain for a while more. If not, how can you bear the pains you put onto my family's Xiao Li?" Elder Jiang let out a heart-tearing and lung-splitting howl. His entire body rapidly aged, his skin wrinkled, and his originally white skin turned whiter. Even a few of his teeth fell out. With his dantian shattered, his cultivation was considered gone and he became an ordinary person. An ordinary person who was over 100 years old, who was old and weak, who wanted to obtain this. But unfortunately, Elder Jiang had eaten countless talented treasures, so his vitality was difficult to lessen. He had clearly become an old man who was over 100, but he hadn't died. He could only painfully and bitterly look towards Hashi. At this moment, Hashi couldn't stand it anymore. The long sword in her hand dropped with a peng sound to the ground and her knees turned soft. Kneeling to the ground, she spit out a mouthful of blood. The silver needles in her body flew out and her dantian finally stopped igniting. Larodie, are you all right? The little golden dragon raced out of her space and quickly began to support Hushy's body. Dandan also made his way out of her space and began weeping by Hushy's side. Mother, what's wrong with you? Don't scare Dandan. As he was talking, he was also sending spiritual chi to Hushy's body. When Dandan's spiritual chi and Hushy's entered her body, it quickly allowed her ignited dantian to feel much better. Hushy's complexion was still deathly pale, but she extended her hand to lightly rub Dandan's head. Be good Dandan, nothing is wrong with mother. Dandan held Hushy's hand and checked all over it, several times, before confirming that his beloved mother was truly all right. Then, he began to cry again. Mother, don't scare Dandan. Dandan doesn't want to see you wounded nor see you spitting out blood. Bad mother, you threw Dandan back into your space and got injured. In the future, Dandan will no longer trust you. WA1, RRR tilde. Hushy could coolly and elegantly laugh when a group of martial artists was being beat, but towards Dandan's sobbing, she lacked any means to. She knitted her eyebrows, feeling a headache. To the side, the little golden dragon watched the good play. Only when he saw Hushy was helpless to do anything, he walked forward to say, Dandan, the bad people who injured Larodie aren't dead yet. Call Little Purple, let's properly entertain them together. 1. WA, the sound of a child's cry. After approximately the time it took to burn a stick of incense, this desolate residence, located in the eastern outskirts of Yangjing City, suddenly let out a violent boom. Completely collapsing, it became ruins, enveloped in dense, scary air. Inside the ruins, aside from a monster that lacked all 4 limbs, a nose, mouth, ears, and eyes as well as a bloody person who howled in pain, there weren't any other creatures visible. As a result of this place being remote and it being late at night, nobody discovered this. Only until the 3rd day, a white-clothed male appeared in front of these ruins. Looking at the squirming freak with an incomplete body and the incessantly wiggling and screaming mincemeat on the floor, he couldn't help but knit his handsome eyebrows, exposing a suspicious expression. Eastern outskirts of Yangjing, he shouldn't have found the wrong place. Clearly it was the day to deliver the goods, but how come there wasn't a shadow of any human beings? Furthermore, even the house had turned into ruins. In the end, what happened? Looking at the monster lacking all 4 limbs who was wiggling at him, it seemed to want to convey something. The white-clothed male expressed a loathing expression on his face. A ball of fire condensed in his hands and he threw it towards the monster without limbs. All that was heard was Kai La before that wiggling monster turned into ashes, disappearing without a trace. The white-clothed male brushed the dust off his clothes and pondered for a moment before a bag appeared in his hands and the shouting piece of mincemeat was wrapped inside. In Jinling Kingdom, the 4 largest clans, Murong, Nailan, Ouyang and Huangfu, were all on par with each other. In Kangming Kingdom, Feng family was unrivaled, they were an outstanding and large family. In the entire Kangming Kingdom, from the royal family to the sects, nobody dared to bother them. Even in Miluo continent, one of the 4 biggest sects, Liu Li sect, was a part of their property. Feng family's official residence was located on Kangming Kingdom's Wu Liang Mountain. Or, it would be better to say that Wu Liang Mountain was entirely considered Feng family's property. The ancestors of Feng family built their paradise in the area with the most dense spiritual qi. They used the blackened phoenix soul as the family's defense and attacker. It could be said that living on the mountain was both dangerous and favorable. It was easily able to be guarded and difficult to attack, making it a beneficial place to cultivate. And this paradise was comparable to the magnificence of Immortal Palace's pavilions and kiosks with its engraved corridors and painted halls. But what was most rare was that one didn't even need to meditate cross-legged. By just breathing in, rich spiritual power would circulate inside the body. Being inside was like being inside the 9th level of heaven, outside the world of immortals, letting people wish to linger and forget about going home. So it's surprised that the entire cultivation world scrambled for the chance to be able to enter Feng family. So much so that, even if they became a manservant in Feng family, they would be bringing honor to one's ancestors and become admired by everyone. At this moment, instead the study of the main building of Feng family, a black-clothed male with grave facial expressions was just saying something to a middle-aged male. Naturally, that black-clothed and grave-faced youth was Feng family's young master, Feng Yunjing. Although nowadays, Feng Yunjing was in power, regarding major events, he still needed the clan elders and his father, Feng Tianba's, decision. Regarding this time's loss at Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory, he needed to have an explanation for Feng family's elders. Hearing Feng Tianba's words, the image of Hush's elegant and delicate expression flashed through his mind before he quickly denied it. It couldn't be him, that person was difficult to deal with, but was only a foundation establishment stage martial artist. Even if they received Zijin Palace Hall's inheritance, what did he count as? He couldn't have obtained Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory. Feng Tianba also quickly turned his thoughts back to Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory. His voice was deep as he said, seeing as Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory can exchange owners, an expert must have been the one who took control. Our Feng family doesn't need to compete against them in the future. As for that spring tree, honored Sir Mu Hua already said he thought of an alternative method. Our Feng family's secret ministry is planning to plunder. You don't have to worry anymore. When he heard what he said, Feng Yunjing nodded his head. Immediately after, he knitted his eyebrows, but this time, Lian Ying was unable to obtain Zijin Palace Hall's inheritance. Useless person. Feng Tianba coldly snorted, then calmly said, how many years have we been planning, how much resources have been spent on her, how many preparations had been made for her for this trip to the Sealed Dragon Domain. Clearly success should have been assured, didn't expect that she was defeated under a foundation establishment stage youngster's hand and even acted so hot-headedly in 100 Herb Mist. Practically is losing all of Feng family's face. If it wasn't for the sake of her master's face, I would have thrown her out of Feng family a long time ago. As Feng Tianba was speaking, anger was rolling over his face in bursts. Recalling the scene, outside of the secret territory, of Feng Lian Ying's bare body, he was itching to beat this daughter to death. Originally he wanted to wed her to Nangong Yu, firmly fastening him. But it seems like now, these thoughts must be drop. This trash that can't be seen in public, Nangong Yu's eyes are higher than the top, how could she possibly meet his gaze? Speaking of the youngster that stole the Zijin Palace Hall inheritance, Feng Tianba deeply sighed and then handed a jade book to Feng Yunjing. Lowering his voice, he told him, I'm afraid this youngster isn't very simple, you take a look. Feng Yunjing's face was puzzled, taking the jade book, his expression was deep. A moment later, Feng Yunjing's face returned to his regular without ripples face. Then, he let out an astonished expression, lowly saying, able to completely cure Ouyang Haoshuan's fractured meridians and even his cultivation level was reinstated to how it was previously. Genius Dr. Shi Yu, father, are you certain they're the same person? Feng Tianba pursued his lips, from what you've said, that youth, Shi Yu, received Zijin Palace Hall's inheritance. That in itself proves that he has medical skills. Adding on to that are his deeds in 100 Herb Mist, he clearly has much higher medical skills compared to Feng Lian Ying. On the world, there aren't many brilliant doctors. Yet it just happens that two suddenly appear, and both are surnamed Shi. Moreover, I also heard that the genius Dr. Shi who cured Ouyang Haoshuan was a 17 or 18-year-old youth. Therefore, I'm 90% certain that this youth called Shi Yu is the genius Dr. Shi that's caused the medical world to go crazy. Talking up to here, Feng Tianba's gaze turned serene. Yunjing, although this time's operation, at the secret territory, was a fail, you can't say we didn't gain anything from it. Regarding this Shi Yu, you must clarify for me, if he truly has such godly methods, our Feng family needs to rush to hold him inside-out hands. A blaze burned in Feng Yunjing's eyes before quickly disappearing and immediately after, he seemed to have thought of something. His expression was faint as he lowered his voice and asked, "But father, how should we deal with Nangongyu?" His relationship with that Shi-yu appears to be excellent. For that Shi-yu he didn't hesitate to clash with me. Feng Yunjing, himself, didn't know where his thoughts were. He found out that Shi-yu could possibly be a woman, and Nangongyu and Shi-yu's intimacy was all concealed. Naturally, Feng Tianba thought Nangongyu's favor of Shi-yu was due to his medical skills, so his expression was grave as he said, "Nangongyu, if you can avoid, then avoid. By all means, you must not go and deliberately provoke him. He isn't someone you can bother right now." Having heard what he said, Feng Yunjing's complexion sunk and his heart was filled with refusal. Nangongyu was at nascent soul stage, he was also at nascent soul stage. And adding on to that was the numerous, difficult to deal with, magical weapons owned by Feng family. Feng Yunjing didn't believe that he would lose to him. Why did father say he was someone he couldn't provoke? Feng Yunjing ground his teeth. "Father, don't speak, he only has this bit of skill. Even if he's very difficult to deal with, you're his life-saving benefactor. Don't tell me he can bite the hand that feeds him. Why should we need to avoid him like a taboo?" 1. Well, without Ripple's face, poker face. When he heard what was said, Feng Tianba became startled. Then, he shook his head. Life-saving benefactor? He hadn't finished speaking when his voice turned mocking halfway through. Feng Yunjing was about to ask when Feng Tianba immediately waved his hand, "All you need to know is to not provoke Nangongyu, it'll be alright then. Regarding Shi-yu's matters, secretly investigate them. If you're certain, quietly make contact with him. With our Feng family's status, as long as he's sensible, I don't believe a mere foundation establishment stage martial artist won't be tempted. As long as Shi-yu is willing to submit himself to Feng family, even Nangongyu can't do anything, right?" Feng Yunjing ground his teeth. "But father, nowadays, Nangongyu is becoming stronger and stronger and won't consent to join us by marriage. I'm afraid he'll become a big worry for our Feng family in the future." "Okay, you don't have to worry about this matter anymore." Feng Tianba waved his hands, preventing him from asking any more questions. "If there's nothing else, withdraw first." Feng Yunjing's expression fluctuated, but seeing Feng Tianba's dignified expression, he swallowed any remaining words he had and quickly left the room. After Feng Yunjing retreated, approximately the time it took to burn a stick of incense later, a white figure appeared in the doorway of Feng Tianba's study. This person was precisely the white-clothed male who appeared at Jiang family's other courtyard. At this moment, he was carrying a bag. The bag seemed to have something incessantly squirming inside it, so much so that you could even faintly hear someone's hoarse yells coming from within. When this person entered the study, he humbly saluted Feng Tianba. With a lowered voice, he reported, "Clan head, the situation has changed. The underground testing pharmacy in Yangjing's eastern outskirts seemed to have been destroyed by someone. Subordinate used spiritual skills to investigate, and all of the bound black spirit plants have been completely destroyed. There's also this." The white-clothed male shook the bag and it loosened slightly. The bag began to open when the thick smell of rotting blood assaulted one's senses. Accompanying the smell was the sound of a hoarse and broken voice. A mincemeat skeleton appeared in front of their eyes. All the internal organs and blood in the skeleton had filled up the bag. But what was strange was that this person had already turned into this weird monster, but that mutilated skull was completely intact. Furthermore, it could even let out such pained howls. This scene was truly too terrifying and strange. Feng Tianba shook for half a day before saying in disbelief, "This is Elder Jiang." Once Feng Yunjing exited Feng Tianba's study, his face turned gloomy. That beautiful yet icy appearance kept flashing through his eyes. But that face was peach-colored towards Nangongyu. It was somewhat prettier than this immortal manner's exquisite jade flower trees. From childhood, Feng Yunjing got whatever he wanted. Which woman didn't stick to him like a housefly when she saw him? Only this Shi-yu, refusing his invitation 3 times, even facing him with a long sword. If it wasn't for Nangong Yu supporting her, she was a mere foundation establishment stage martial artist. Where would one find the courage to refuse him? Who would have the capability to refuse him? The secret desire tilde hope and envy at the bottom of his heart burned, causing his grave and stern expression to distort. Standing in the middle of a pavilion, Feng Yunjing tightly clenched his fist around a stone pillar, mumbling to himself, "Shi Yu, you're destined to be mine, unable to escape my palm. When I kill Nangong Yu, you'll become my person. I'll have you kneeling in front of me, begging me to love you. Young master, you've returned." Suddenly, a tender and soft female's voice interrupted Feng Yunjing's thoughts. Soon after, a woman full of gold and jade with beautiful and elegant features threw herself into Feng Yunjing's embrace. "Young master, this time you left for such a long time. Yang really missed you." When a fragrant and overly sweet woman threw herself into his embrace, it should be warm tilde fragrant tilde and jade. But Feng Yunjing suddenly thought of something. When that person neared him, the faint smell of herbal medicine hit him in the face. There wasn't any of the woman's beauty nor pampering, instead, it was an uncontrollable and strong feeling of indifference. Suddenly, Feng Yunjing felt as if the smell of cosmetics disgusted him. He shook off the woman that threw herself into his embrace and coldly said, "Go away. Seeing you makes me feel nauseous." Finished speaking, his figure disappeared. The woman who had been left inside the pavilion first stared blankly, then her pretty face warped. Previously, she was a servant girl in Feng family. Because her appearance was outstanding, she was chosen to be Feng Yunjing's personal servant girl. Being young master's servant girl meant that inevitably, there would be a day she would become young master's woman. Chen Yanga had always been arrogant. She was the prettiest and cleverest woman by young master's side. Although young master's heart was cold, he would occasionally treat her warmly. But today she clearly saw loathing in young master's eyes. Chen Yanga angrily punched the stone pillar, mumbling fragments to herself, "Shi Yu?" In the end, where did this vixen Shi Yu that young master speaks of come from? I need to have this person properly investigated. Wanting to seduce young master, I want you to properly understand not knowing shamelessness. Igniting one's dantian, naturally one would need to pay the price. Therefore, after Hashi returned to be courtyard, she didn't even have enough time to relocate everyone inside the secret territory before she sunk into a coma. Dan Dan and the little golden dragon stood by Hashi's side the entire night. Neither of them dared to even move 1 foot away, and Dan Dan cried until his eyes were red and swollen. Wu Xin used his spiritual energy to search for the condition of Hush's injury and wrinkled his eyebrows. Hush's injury was extremely severe. Her Dantian's spiritual energy was close to being drained, but what was even more urgent was that, after losing consciousness, Hashi developed a fever. And this type of fever rendered her incapable of receiving any spiritual energy externally. Even feeding her supplementary spiritual energy, didn't work. Dan Dan lied down next to Hashi, grabbing her hand. He had cried so much his voice turned hoarse. "Mother, you clearly said that nothing would happen. You said you wouldn't abandon Dan Dan." Woo woo woo. To the side, the little golden dragon comfortingly patted the little fellow. But he was also worried sick and couldn't say any comforting words. When they were at Jiang family's other courtyard at the eastern outskirts, he thought that Laro Die's injury wasn't too serious. Laro Die didn't show any symptoms of being an ill person. She could even cheerfully and wittily punish that old bass. But how could he forget? Laro Die's true cultivation stage was merely Meridian's stage. Breaking out into high-level gold core stage would undoubtedly have a price. As the night turned a bit darker, Hashi continued to have a fever. Her face was flushed and she remained unconscious. Dan Dan cried and under the little golden dragon's pacifying, he fell asleep. The little golden dragon lay by the headboard, scouring his inherited memories for any means to save Hashi. Suddenly, Wu Xin's, who was standing in the doorway, expression turned cold. He quickly stood up and a flying sword appeared in his hand. But his flying sword just appeared in his hands when the grave expression on his face turned into shock. He blurted out, "Master, you. Why did you come?" The arriving person was travel-worn and their face was haggard. Shockingly, it's Nangong Yu. Nangong Yu completely ignored Wu Xin. He quickly walked towards the front of the bed and softly carried her. Due to her having a fever, the girl's cheeks were flushed and her originally soft and pink lips had lost all their color, and even began showing cracked lines. 1. Supplementary spiritual energy to at least get her to a more stable place in her dantian. Long eyelashes hung down, covering up a pair of cold, phoenix eyes. A faint silhouette shone on snow-white skin, causing the person to appear frail and helpless. It was completely different when compared to her ordinary craftiness, the appearance of not letting anything or person control her. Nangong Yu softly let out a breath. The pair of hands that carried Hushi tightened, his heart welled up with regret and pity. Little girl, why do you have to be so stubborn? He lowered his head, softly murmuring, why didn't you ask for my help? Why can't you rely on me? Am I so unworthy of your trust? He said such reprimanding words, but his tone was filled with pampering and tenderness. His slender fingers softly played with her messy hair and his expression was that of someone who was tending to the most precious treasure. The little golden dragon who was sleeping at the head of the bed finally woke up from his dreams and loudly shouted, You! Who are you? Who let you touch Lao Die's body as you wished? The little golden dragon's yells woke up the originally unconscious Dan Dan. Dan Dan rubbed his swollen eyes, and at a glance, he saw Nangong Yu who was carrying Hushi in his embrace. He cried out, Beautiful Gidge, Mother is injured. Quickly save her. You're so awesome, help Mother wake up quicker, okay? Woo woo woo, Nangong Yu's usual calm turned distracted now. The crying spiritual pet before him was a pink pig. Moreover, this little pig called Hushi Mother but called him Beautiful Gidge. Nangong Yu's mouth twitched and turned down. Immediately, he restored his usual calm and indifferently said, Naturally, my coming here was to come and save Elevener. After saying this, his finger softly cut across his own wrist and very quickly, a dark red trail of blood came out of the wound. Master, how can you waste blood essence at such an important time? Wu Xin's face was filled with anxiety. He practically wanted to run over and stop Nangong Yu. But, one of Nangong Yu's cold glances stopped him from acting blindly without thinking. Don't forget why I pushed the plan earlier. A stern voice containing gloominess was heard, Wu Xin, I'll forgive you for this time. Next time, if Hushi retains injuries again, you don't have to return to Hell King Manor. After hearing what was said, Wu Xin turned rigid. A slight chill ran across his back and after a while, he finally mustered up one word, yes. In fact, this time, he wanted to teach Hushi a lesson. So when Hushi had him stay in B courtyard, he didn't follow her and merely gave a protective jade slip. During this time, although Wu Xin's person was at B courtyard, his soul had always been paying attention to the movements of the jade slip. As long as Hushi called for help, he would immediately rush over. Dan Dan blinked his big eyes and flattened his lips. Beautiful Gidge is a good person, he's saved Mother multiple times. Moreover, Dan Dan has seen Mother play and kiss with Beautiful Gidge. Long, what is benefiting at others' expense? Little golden dragon, when the pure yin blood went into her stomach, her inflamed dantian seemed to have been given spring stream and slowly returned to its original state. Nangong Yu pressed his left hand on Hushi's back and slowly channeled his spiritual energy into her body, cautiously restoring her dantian which had been burned. After the time it took to burn a stick of incense, the pained expression on Hushi's face slowly disappeared, becoming peaceful. But, Nangong Yu's complexion turned deathly pale. His originally tired eyes had greenish-black ash added onto them. To the side, Wu Xin was full of anxiousness. He wanted to step up and ask to substitute as the person giving Hushi spiritual energy. But he was quickly glared at by Master with his cold eyes. Nangong Yu used his hand to feel Hushi's forehead. After ensuring that she no longer had a fever, he loosened his breath and extended his hand to wipe away the perspiration on her forehead. The room turned tranquil and ambiguous. Nangong Yu tightly held onto Hushi and his line of sight never moved away, not even for a second. He wanted to stay like this forever, to have her by his side forever. But right now, he couldn't. If his matters weren't finished, then if Hushi were to stay by his side, there was a possibility that danger would happen one day. So much so that she may even die a violent death. This was something he couldn't endure, even if he died. Nangong Yu slowly released his hands and stood up. I'm leaving, take good care of her. Furthermore, don't let Hushi know of my coming here, and you absolutely cannot let other people know either. Finished speaking, he faced the two fellows by Hushi's bedside. Did you clearly hear me? The little golden dragon and Dan Dan acted like they were awed and simultaneously nodded their heads. Their appearances were extremely lovable and cute. Nangong Yu leaned over to leave a light kiss on Hushi's forehead before turning around to leave. But, when he had just reached the doorway, he suddenly turned around. His serene eyes closely watched Dan Dan as he gloomily said, when you see me next time, you must not call me beautiful Gidge. You have to call me Daddy, do you hear me? Heard. Heard it. Dan Dan's face was dumbfounded. Under Nangong Yu's intense gaze, he obediently nodded his head. Wu Xin turned his head to facepalm. Master, is threatening Wang Fei's spirit pets really good when she's in a coma? If he remembered correctly, Wang Fei still hasn't agreed to marry into his house. Hashi felt that this sleep was endless. A painful and burning torture accompanied beside her in sleep. She felt as if she had been thrown into Taishang Lao's refining pill stove like Monkey Sun was. 1. It was scalding hot everywhere, it was painful everywhere. This sort of torment continued for a long time, but soon after, someone softly brought her into their embrace. That hug was extremely tender and doting, and even carried traces of familiarity. This allowed her body and mind to relax. Soon after, an ice-cold clear spring and bloody-smelling stream entered her throat and went into her dantian. Following this, the burning pain faded away without a trace. Even her bruised dantian was moistened by this spiritual energy blood, slowly restoring. The early morning's warm sunshine sprinkled across her snow-white and jade-like skin and stroking her soft hair. Her long eyelashes faintly trembled as Hashi slowly opened her eyes. Mother. Before she could make out everything in front of her, she felt a short and stout heavily crashing into her embrace. Soon after, she heard the child's familiar weeping. 1. Taishang Lao's refining pill stove like Monkey Sun. This is a reference to the book Journey to the West. Taishang is a title of respect for Taoists, and Laozi was an ancient Chinese philosopher and writer. Monkey Sun is Sun Wukong, aka the Monkey King. He is most well known from Journey to the West, one of the 4 great classical novels of Chinese literature. Hashi is referring to the time that Sun Wukong was thrown into Lao's refining pill stove or 8-way trigram crucible. You can read more on this here. Woo woo woo, you're finally awake, mother. Don't die, mother, don't scare Dan Dan anymore. Woo woo woo. Hashi turned her head to look around her as Dan Dan was crying in her embrace. Circling around in the air staring at her with a happy expression was the little golden dragon, who was also scolding Dan Dan. You fool, Laro Die woke up, how can she still die? You're so heavy, throwing yourself onto Laro Die. Not even afraid you'll squish Laro Die and internally injure her. And Wu Xin, who was standing in the doorway, watching her, let out a loose breath. What surprised Hashi the most was a pale-faced little gunyang with red eyes who laid on the bed and staring at her as big teardrops tumbled out of her big eyes. Xiao Li. Hashi cried out in surprise as a smiling expression appeared on her face. You recovered? But before she could finish asking the question, the little gunyang let out a big cry and, following Dan Dan, also threw herself onto Hashi. Miss, I'm sorry. It's all because I'm no good, it's because I'm useless. I hurt wet Nurse Chen and caused Miss to receive injuries and fall into a coma. Woo woo woo. By the time it was early morning, Xiao Li had already woken up. Under the treatment of the spiritual spring water and nectar from the 1,000-leaf flower, she was already almost completely healed. She could even change back into human form. But after she woke up, she discovered that Hashi wasted a great amount of spiritual chi in order to save her. Not only that, she also concluded a life and death contract with her. She even received injuries in order to revenge her. After the little fox found out about this, she was incessantly worried and blamed herself. She didn't once stop crying. After Hashi woke up and she heard her soft voice, she couldn't bear the sadness and fright she felt over these few days and began to wail. Hashi was made speechless when she saw their appearances when they were afraid she would die, but she also felt touched. She turned around on the bed and slowly circulated her spiritual energy, then she let out a pleasant smile. Very strange, apparently the aftermath of my ignited dantian isn't as serious as I thought it was. I feel that my dantian's spiritual force is abundant right now and the spiritual chi in my meridians aren't clogged at all. Apparently, my cultivation level even raised a little. Speaking up to here, Hashi carried the plump Dan in her embrace and pinched his pink cheeks. Laughing, she teased, "Okay, little crying bag. Look, nothing is wrong with mother. Don't look like the sky is falling down." Dan flattened his mouth and stammered, "It wasn't originally like this. Yesterday evening, mother was scalding hot and no matter how loud it was, you didn't wake up. No matter what we did to try and give you spiritual energy, it was no use." Dan was truly really scared that mother would die. If it weren't for, after, Dan's words were half said when Wu Xin, who was standing to the side, lightly coughed and walked forward. "Wang Fei, the servants inside your courtyard have already been waiting outside for a long time. Because you were not awake, they did not dare to act on their own initiative and deal with the corpses. May I ask whether or not you wish to go outside right now and explain it to them?" Hashi hadn't even said anything, but Wu Xin's words caused Dan's complexion to change and he quickly shut his mouth. Hashi wrinkled her eyebrow and suspiciously casted a glance at Wu Xin, then looked at Dan again. Dan, what were you just saying, if it weren't for, after what?" Nothing. Dan's small head shook like a rattle. Dan never said after. Hashi looked towards the little golden dragon, whose face conveyed a "I don't understand what you're talking about" expression. "Mysterious and secretive, what are you up to?" Hashi muttered, no longer trying to understand these few fellows, and walked out of the room. Chapter 408 Heavenly Paradise. When Shi Jiao and the others saw that Hashi was healed, they all seemed to become better at the same time as well. Then, they suddenly ran up in front of Hashi and kneeled down on the floor with a plop sound. "Miss, you're okay. Really is too great." Clearly they were a group of rough men, but now, each and every one of them was crying. Some were even sobbing, repeatedly saying "Miss." It really caused Hashi to not know whether to laugh or cry. Shi Jiao wiped away his tears and he said, with his voice choked with emotion, "Miss, may I ask, where should we bury Wet Nurse Chen's body? Do you need me to create a burial mound for her behind B Courtyard's mountain?" When he mentioned Wet Nurse Chen, Hashi's eyes dimmed a little and a thread filled with heavy sorrow streaked through her eyes. She was silent for a long time before softly saying, "No need to, this B Courtyard isn't safe anymore. Soon, we'll have to change our place. Regarding Wet Nurse Chen and the others' bodies, use spiritual jade to preserve them. We will send them to an earthly paradise to be buried." After confirming her own body was all right, Hashi didn't pause and began to arrange a follow-up plan. It was very clear that Naylan family's B Courtyard is no longer safe. Hashi had too many treasures that others coveted, but her strength was too weak. She had no means to display these treasures' former might. If it was just herself, she wouldn't be afraid of anyone coming over to plunder and long for her treasures. But when thinking of Wet Nurse Chen's death and Xiao Li's skinned appearance, lingering fear bubbled forth in Hashi's heart. Ordinary people were innocent, treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime. She could protect Xiao Li, Shi Jiao, and the others for a short period of time, but not for a lifetime. Rather than constantly worrying about their safety, it would be better to think of ways to increase their strength, so that they would be able to defend themselves. Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And the best location to promote and protect Shijio and the others was naturally sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory. Before leaving, Hashi had people return this bee courtyard left by Nalan Manor to its former state. She prepared to go outside to purchase some little servant girls and manservants to clean bee courtyard. After all, this was the place that Nalan Hashi and wet nurse Chen had lived in for over 10 years, leaving behind many irremovable marks. What's more, if people from Nalan Manor decided to visit one day, this was a good way to pull the wool over their eyes. After leaving, Hashi quickly took out a light dress and entered Kang Mountain with everyone in tow. The band sent bursts of bright light and in the blink of an eye, everyone appeared in a dark green grassland. There weren't any pavilions or kiosks here. Chapter 409 Settle in Sealed Dragon Territory's Secret Territory. Shisan couldn't help but seize the meat on his face, muttering, "Miss, you're saying we'll be settling here? The spiritual energy here is richer than Water Moon's Zongbao Mountain. Settle here? What? You don't want to?" No, not that. How could I not be willing?" Shisan excitedly answered, even his words shook. "Miss, how did you find this place? Are we still inside Kang Mountain? Such a valuable place. Those cultivators won't come and fight with us, right?" Hashi faintly smiled and didn't mind everyone as she dropped a bomb on them. "This is Sealed Dragon Domain's most comfortable greenwood realm. Right now, I'm the master of Sealed Dragon Domain. The entire Sealed Dragon Domain is considered my territory. You say, can or can we not settle here? Sealed Dragon Territory's secret territory. This time, it wasn't only Shisan. Even Shijio and the others let out cries of surprise. Heavens! What was Miss saying? This was Sealed Dragon Territory's secret territory. It was the place all those cultivators forcibly took earlier and the place filled with countless treasures. Sealed Dragon Territory? It was the Sealed Dragon Territory that even nascent soul-stage martial artists were somewhat afraid of and wouldn't enter to explore unless they had made preparations. It was that place. The place that, to them previously, wasn't completely out of reach. The Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory that they didn't even dreaming of going to join the chaos to treasure hunt. Moreover, Miss was now the owner of Sealed Domain's secret territory. In other words, every inch inside this secret territory and every magic weapon all belonged to Miss. Shisan suddenly felt a bit muddle-headed and felt that it was somewhat hard to breathe. Heavens, he really wanted to know, what other world-shattering news did his family's Miss have to give afterwards to cause him to explode? Shijio and the others' thoughts, by comparison, were much more blunt and simple. After Hashi confirmed that this secret territory, that everyone was scrambling to plunder, was theirs, everyone let out enthusiastic shouts. The little golden dragon unsteadily flew in front of the excited crowd of people, arrogantly pouring cold water on them. If it wasn't for the fact that you are Larodie's slaves, you would have never been given such a gift by Larodie. Ben Zun would have never consented to allowing you inside. I'm warning you, the matters regarding the secret territory cannot be spread out. If you dare to even leak one character outside, I'll immediately let you become a departed spirit. Shijio and the others only considered this for a second before they understood the severity behind these words. This was Sealed Domain's secret territory. Countless nascent soul martial artists wished to plunder it. If outsiders knew that their Miss owned it now, wouldn't all the martial artists in Miluo continent look at Miss as a target to plunder and chase? At once, Shijio and the others kneeled down to Hashi. "Miss, be at ease. We swear we won't leak out anything regarding Sealed Dragon Domain to anyone else. If we go against this oath, lightning will strike us and we'll die without a corpse." Hashi waved her hand, faintly saying, "First, you guys go build a few simple residences. Afterwards, everyone come down and find a nice place to bury wet nurse Chen." Shijio and the others repeatedly answered yes, then they quickly got busy. Previously, Although they passed comfortable lives inside Nayland Manor's Bee courtyard and their strength made progress, they were at a loss and confused. But today, they saw sealed dragon domain's heavenly paradise, all their confusion and loss disappeared. At this moment, Shi-san, Shi-jie, and the others no longer had any doubts. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.